Hello and welcome to another Pauper video. I'm Cali Kais. Today we're doing Decks of the Week. That is checking out the Magic Online metagame, the leagues, the challenges, and of course the spice, of which there is a ton this week. Before we get into it, check out the inaugural Upstate New York Pauper Open if you're in the Northeast. It's a cash prize event happening on March 1st. There's 39 spots remaining, and it's at a brewery just outside of Rochester, New York. You know you want to be there. Also, check out cardmarket.com, the largest seller of Magic the Gathering cards in Europe. Remember that there's Patreon sideboard guides on patreon.com/calicais, and you can get early access to videos on the YouTube membership. Please like, subscribe, share around. Let me know what you thought about this. And also let me know what you thought about the spice because, maybe I'll pick one of the sweetest ones to record with. Can't come up with all the spice yourself. So getting into the metagame, for the Magic Online leagues, we had 112 trophies this week, which was slightly more by 2 than the previous week. I think there's still some issues with the lag, but we're seeing that generally things are less polarized than the previous week. Last week, well, maybe about the same. Okay, so mono red at 17%. We've got Affinity, Gruul Ramp, and then big surprise to me this week was Walls had a ton of trophies at 8 total. So congrats to those Wallers out there. Then Mono Blue Fae, and then we have Black Green Glee and Madness Burn and Jund Glee. If you do put the Jund and Black Green Glee together, then Glee combo makes up the third spot, which is what we were expecting. Mono Red Affinity Glee combo. And then the next part, like the tier 2 decks, that seems to fluctuate a lot. So we've got like Gruul Ramp, Walls, like I said, made a ton. Stuff like Jund Wildfire or Terror. All those things kind of fight for what's going to be good at that time. So not really very much changes. We did see a couple of Tron, Boros Bully. Those were kind of cool to see. Jund Wildfire sticking in there. And we had, 10 individual decks getting trophies. Some weirdo ones. And then we had 2 different variations of Tron, 2 Boros Bullies. Those are cool to see. And then Boggles, a couple Dimir Fae. So let's check out some of these crazy decks that happen in the challenge or in the metagame. Sorry about that. Okay, I'm back. Before we get into the decks, let's check out the Pauper challenge. Right, so you had Cold Oath Red up at the top, and then Jund Brutescale, Grixis Affinity, Mono Blue, and Golgari Brutescale. If you add up the Glee decks, they're actually at 18.8%. of the entire weekend, which puts it at the number 1 deck. So we have Glee, then Cold Oath, then Affinity. Nobody's arguing that that's just the way that the format has shaken out, and that's very similar to the leagues. So the other thing to note was that these top decks didn't have that good of a win rate. I'm not sure exactly what happened in that case, but maybe the other things are happening. The best thing out of this was that Poison Storm had a 100% win rate, with this pilot Skipchino actually winning the event on Sunday. So congratulations. Azorius Familiars, GN42 by himself with a 6-2, only losing to the Poison Storm player. It's so good. But yeah, that was a cool thing to see. I just recorded this Poison Storm list that will be out on Friday of this week, and you can check it out early on the YouTube membership if you're interested. So why don't we check out their list? So this is very similar to the list that I've been pushing on my Patreon. So on my list, I have 3 snaps here. Our Skipchino has changed one of the snaps to be a Prologue Diaphyresis in the main deck. We have 16 lands, 12 depletion lands, 4 island, and then 4 Lotus Petal. So that's pretty explosive on the mana with the 4 Pentad Prism and 2 Chalice and a full 12 proliferations. They've got the 5 infect spells and then 2 deep analysis, which has been a lot better in the metagame with Refurbished Familiar. In the sideboard, my sideboard has 1 more snap, and then 1 more Dispel and 1 more Moment's Peace, but they've chosen to play 3 negates in that slot, where the 3 negates potentially can be good against Brutescale or like enchantment-based stuff. It's possible you could also bring in the negate against something like a Dust to Dust deck, but I feel like we're good enough versus white decks that it doesn't matter. But I mean, if you're playing against a control deck that has no clock, then you have so many counter spells to bring in with this specific list. If you're not familiar with it, you give yourself, or you give your opponent a poison counter with one of these spells, then you just continue to proliferate, draw cards. It's a sick deck. So let's check out some of the spice. I need to reorder it first. Okay, I've successfully ordered by spiciness level, so let's get into it. First up, we have Mono Blue Fairies by Evil Drake. The interesting thing here is that they're playing one Essence Flux. You know, Fairies, not a very spicy deck, but Essence Flux is kind of spicy. You can flicker a creature, return into the battlefield under its owner's control. So this is an anti-removal, but also helps to flicker your Spellstutter sprites and then just turn your sprite into a counterspell for 1 mana. That's pretty sweet. So I like the idea of that as just an additional. So they have 4 counterspell, 2 Essence Flux, 4 Spellstutter. They can also snap and replay the Spellstutter. So turns a Trixie deck into an even Trixier deck. Next up, this is Tron. I played this deck to a trophy, and what I did here was I completely cut Expedition Map, relying on 3 crop rotations. This is very similar to Raptor 56's Flickertron version, where he's just playing the crop rotations as a way to get Tron online, otherwise naturally drawing into it. So we have so much card draw with 4 Dispute and 3 Grim Search, plus also the 4 Canny Trail for card selection, that what I did was just play 8 1-drops, Chromatic Star and Wizard's Rockets, plus 3 Energy Refractor, just draw hard and then get the crop rotation online. In previous versions of the deck, I had Expedition Map, so I was able to cut crop rotation post board, but here this becomes part of your mana base, so you cannot cut it, making it a little bit more risky against like a Dispel or even Spellstutter sprites. Next deck that was also a trophy by me, so I'm not trying to shill, but this is a different take on Familiars, something that I really enjoy playing. So this version of the deck is playing a ridiculous amount of lands. We're at 20 lands and 1 Lorien revealed, and then I have 4 Ponder and 4 Preordain. And even though I don't like the Doctor Who arts, I chose the, the old frame, old border ones for myself. The idea here is that we want to minimize any possibility of having a mulligan. So 20 lands, 8 cantrips, and then these cantrips are 1 mana ways to trigger your Godfarer's Faithful to gain life, or your Murmuring Mystic to spit out birds and actually clock your opponent. So with that going on, we have a lot of triggers flying all over the place, and then we have foil in the deck. You can discard an island card and another card rather than pay the spell's mana cost, counter target spell. So Familiars has now become Legacy blue-white control. We have 9 islands, 10 islands with the Glacial Floodplain. It's pretty easy to cast the foil, and because Familiars draws tons and tons of cards, the card disadvantage of foil doesn't really matter that much. Also, late game, when you have 2 Familiars in play, that means foil is cost reduced by 2, turning into just blue-blue counterspell, which is easier to just cast in the late game. And I'm also playing 3 Modern Age and 2 Deep Analysis, because this actually allows us to clock our opponent. We can't just play a slow game against Black-Green Glee and somehow win when they're going to be drawing tons of cards and eventually find their way to punch through. But Murmuring Mystic and the Modern Age give you the clock to keep pressing against your opponent while they're on the back foot with your counter spells and snaps and stuff. I also have Snapback in the sideboard as an additional free spell for the Glee decks. Went down to just the Dust to Dust for anti-affinity, Thraben Charm as a way to deal with creatures as well, but also graveyard decks, and 2 Prismatic Strands, which Prismatic Strands plus Hydroblast is quite good versus mono red, and then ended up just winning me the game versus the Elves decks, which was awesome. So moving on, we have Golgari Broodgale combo. I know Black-Green Glee isn't very spicy, but you can check this one out. It's got a lot going on. We've got Slitherhead. You can scavenge for 0 to exile it and put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. Any creature. And Bonemind Orator. You can exile it from your graveyard to return another creature card from your graveyard to your hand with Evolution Witness. So you can Slitherhead your Evolution Witness to get something back. And they were playing an Unearth package here with 4 Unearths. So it's kind of neat. They're on 2 Cash Grab, 4 Malevolent Rumble, and no amount of the 2-drop things to Deadly Dispute. So interesting take on the list. I think they were happy with it, but they said maybe it's not the best version of the deck. The sideboard looks pretty similar with 4 weather, 4 drown, 4 snuff out, and the flex slots here being some troublemaker oofs, which definitely synergizes with the cash grab and malevolent rumble to be taking out some affinity creature things, or some affinity lands, and or maybe like the Trespasser's Curse that can try to stop you. The next deck, we have 2 Ephemeratons. So first one by All Eyes on Me. This person is not playing map either. They have 3 crop rotation, and they have just 4 energy refractor and to get the colored sources. They have 1 runaway boulder, which is a sweet card that you can actually search up with Mystical Teachings. It's a 6-drop flash artifact that when it ETBs, it deals 6 damage to target creature an opponent controls, and you can cycle it. So you could teachings for it to cycle it, but you could also put it into play and then flicker it with Ghostly Flicker and keep having a recurable removal spell. They have 2 sprites, which you can also teachings for, that can help answer a Glee, and they have a Murmuring Mystic as a clock with only 2 mnemonic walls. I think that this makes sense, and that's sort of why I went to 2 Murmuring Mystics, 2 Archaeomancers in the Familiars deck. I just think that Murmuring Mystic being a clock helps a lot, and you can rely on your Ephemerates. This person's playing not too much else of note. 2 Pulse of Marasa is a little bit more than I've seen previously. The next Ephemeratron was by EHDM. This person plays all sorts of decks, but what they did here was they they played Avenging Hunter. And they're also on like this Bant mana base. 12 Tron lands, 4 Tranquil Landscapes, 2 forests, 3 island, 1 plains. So no rainbow lands. They're relying on these landscapes to get their colors online. And they have the 4 energy refractors as well. So no other ways to get things. But they're on 4 Impulse, 2 Preordain. So sort of like 8 cantrips in this deck, which I can get behind. And then they were saying that Avenging Hunter was something you could flicker to kind of just use the emblem a lot, but they didn't like it very much in their league. So they wouldn't recommend doing that. Otherwise, they felt pretty good about the list. I do certainly like the maxing on cantrip style. That's more fun. Next deck is Naya Bully by Elvis 10. So this is Boros Bully splashing for Writhing Chrysalis because Chrysalis is overpowered. They have 1 forest in their deck and then a Citadel Gate, which are the only ways to get green mana other than the 4 Springleaf Drum. Springleaf Drum could be pretty good as they spit out a lot of creatures, so it might be really easy to kind of accelerate them. I just thought it was neat that they put Chrysalis in there. Speaking of Chrysalis in decks, we also have Chrysalis in Dredge by Sesta. Sesta likes to experiment. They are playing a mountain forest base, so a red-green based Dredge deck with Faithless Looting, Malevolent Rumble. And then you can Rumble, put your looting in the graveyard, and then looting, and then pitch, Dredge with their Stinkweed Imps. So there's a lot going on here. They also have Sakura Tribe Elder to get lands onto the battlefield. Peter Wayfinder. Only 4 of these these Miller creatures. Interesting. Very, very interesting list. Something I could maybe check out. The next is Red-Green Ramp. So I wanted to highlight Teasdale. Reese also was able to trophy with this deck, but what they discovered and or just promoted was Evolution Witness. Whenever a +1/+, whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on it, you can return a permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. So this works extremely well in this deck, combined with Bannerhide Cruciak, which you can reinforce for 2 for 1 and a green. So you pay 1 green, you put counters on the Witness gets back the Bannerhide. That means for every 2 mana you have lying around, you can get 2 +1/+1 counters on the Witness just infinitely. It's a mana sink, which just turns this Evolution Witness into this giant beater. And the Evolution Witness can get back other stuff. So I know that Teasdale specifically said that he used Malevolent Rumble and saw Witness and Chrysalis, but he had so much mana they just picked up the Witness, adapted it, got back the Chrysalis, and it was kind of like getting a 4/3 for free. So that is very cool. I know that him and Reese had slightly different sideboards, but we saw a player, I think top 8 with a very similar list, putting the Evolution Witness in. And, maybe this is the wave moving forward for Gruul Ramp. Next, I wanted to highlight the silliest, not silliest, but the spiciest of the Walls decks. Walls has been going pretty well this week, like I said. Most of them playing a combo version, but this one is not combo. It is straight up Cascade Walls. We talked about this before. You're just going to get a ton of mana with your Battlement and your Axebane Guardian, get a Tuk-Tuk into play, and then just start slamming stuff. You got Avenging Hunter, Boarding Party, Generous End, and Noid Altasaur. With 4 Winding Wave, 4 Lead the Stampede. You're just going to slam in. It's pretty fun. I have to try that for sure. I love casting the big creatures and jamming in. That's a good Timmy time. The next deck is 4-color Ephemerate. So this is basically Jeskai Ephemerate, and they're specifically splashing for 3 Snuff Outs, with an additional Snuff Out in the sideboard. So they've got 4 in the 75. With Contaminated Landscape and Ice Tunnel for the black mana. They also have a Swamp, of course. And the rest of the deck is pretty much just Jeskai Ephemerate, as normal. 2 Archaeomancer, 2 Commodore, 2 Mystic. I can get behind those numbers. The cool thing is that they get to play Crypt Incursion as a way to gain a lot of life and exile cards from a graveyard, so anti-graveyard tech. Very, very good versus Dredge, of course. Okay, moving up. We're going up the spice level. It's still Affinity, but this is Black-Red Affinity by Tug on Naxos. It's sort of a burn-based Affinity. They have 4 Galblast, 4 Lightning Bolt, 8 draw spells with Deadly Dispute and Reckoner's Bargain, and then they're putting a lot of artifacts on the table as fast as they can, with Blood Fountain making 2 artifacts, these being 1-drops, and then you have the Ichor Wellspring. And then the Fireweaver here says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it deals a damage to each opponent. That means that you play Fireweaver, and then Blood Fountain is just a shock. You have 2 Fireweavers in play, Blood Fountain is 1 mana, deal 4. And then the Blood Fountains, being 2 artifacts on the table, also help you put your Refurbished Familiar and your Mere Enforcer in play. They have 4 Curse for Glee. I feel like that's a little aggressive, but also the Curse can come into play against Mono Red and buy you a lot of time, because Mono Red's putting a lot of creatures on the table. If you got 2 of these in play, Mono Red would be in for a problem. I don't know. It's an interesting way to try it. I'll have to check that deck out as well. Now here, this is Elves. Elves is not very spicy. People play Elves, but this person has played probably the most spicy possible version of Elves. So let's just zoom in a little bit. Look at this sideboard. 4 Counterspell, 2 Mana Leak, 4 Negate, 2 Prohibit. So their whole goal, I guess, with this is get some creatures that make non-green. So Birchlore Rangers, Jaspera Sentinel, and then Rift Sower can all cast non-green spells. And then they're going to try to counterspell out the Glee decks. You can also just use counterspells for the things like Breath Weapon. So Counterspell or Mana Leak for Breath Weapon, Hollow for Breath Weapon. So their idea is, game 1, I'm all in. Game 2, I will just turn my Vines of Vastwood into counterspells. I love that. That's pretty awesome. Nyxborn Hydra as the green fireball as well. Okay, we got 2 decks left. So this almost topped the spiciness, but this is Wurg or Eldrazi Tribal by Chenjitsu. But they love to play these craziest lists. They come up with the really interesting stuff. They've got Gorilla Shaman in the main deck, 3 Coalition Honor Guard in the main deck. So they're like pre-boarding versus Affinity and Glee. Then they have Mass Vandal as a 3 of. This is technically an Eldrazi because it has Changeling. And then Nest Invader, Eldrazi Repurposer, Writhing Chrysalis, all these Eldrazi, with 2 Emrakult's Hatcher. When it ETBs, you put 3/01 Eldrazi spawn. They have Cash Grab, 4 Cash Grab, 4 Rumble, 4 Grapple. So I don't know what they're digging for specifically, but they're going hard on digging. And then they've got the Springleaf Drum here. Sylvok Lifestaff. You can attach it to your creatures and then sacrifice them. They also have Rancor. So it looks kind of like this person is trying to go for giant Chrysalises ASAP. Pretty sweet. 12 lands. Wow. 4 Utopia Sprawl and 12 lands. Okay. That is a spicy deck if I ever saw one. So next, the last on the spiciness is by Asalfatore. This person makes really wild decks constantly. But here we have a mono black Jund zombies. So They're playing some bridges. I think they're playing some bridges and stuff. They've got zombie, merfolk, crypt rats, of course. Refurbished familiar as a zombie. Troll, not a zombie. Zombie fish. And then they also have Avenging Hunter here. Ghoul Caller's Chant to return 2 zombies from the graveyard to your hand. Deadly's Huge Fanatical Offering. Nameless Inversion. Does this get back Nameless Inversion? Yes. Wow. Can return a zombie card. Since this is a zombie, you can return Nameless Inversion with Ghoul Caller's Chant. That is sweet. And we're just doing zombie aggro stuff with Avenging Hunter and Troll. I love it. They've got a sideboard they chose 5 cards that they wanted to have 3 of. Rotten Reunion, Mass Vandal, makes sense. Weather the Storm, of course, Breath Weapon, and Snuff Out. Real cool deck. So hopefully you're inspired by all the spiciness. Hopefully you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next video.